Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now, yesterday on the show, we spoke about the challenges that students and teachers face as they adapt to online classes and home-based learning. We would like to continue that conversation today and focus on what can be done to address the lived reality of most children struggling with online learning and trying to catch up after only having 2 full months of in-class schooling since the MCO began. Now, let's focus on the older students first, those taking exams this year. In fact, they're going to be sitting for SPM in exactly 1 month from today. Ida Thien joins us on the show now. She's the co-founder of the NGO Closing the Gap Malaysia, which helps underprivileged students continue on to university by providing mentoring programs and support. Ida, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now,
Hi,
has the way we've managed this pandemic, with school closures and with multiple postponements of exam dates, has that impacted the students that your NGO works with and perhaps their interest in pursuing tertiary education?
Absolutely. I think this entire pandemic has been going around for 1 year, and I think the general sense that we get from our students is one of anxiety. The SPM has been postponed twice. Some of them have gone through the trials midway for it to be paused. And then, of course, as recently that has happened, many students expected to continue with their trials, but have trials cancelled again. So I think the entire year has been quite a roller coaster for the students that we work with. And I think on top of the anxiety of not knowing when SPM or the trials can happen, is the sense that they're not ready for it. I mean, for them, they have been in school for maybe 2 or 3 months, in Form 5, before the lockdown happened and everything changed. And I think at this point, it's really quite worrying for them whether or not they have actually learned sufficiently over the span of the last year for them to say that they are adequately prepared for an exam like SPM.
Ida, is the anxiety mostly about whether the curriculum has been completed? Is that what they think they are suffering from, a kind of deficit in terms of the curriculum?
I think there are multiple facets to this. I think on one level, yes, you're right, Sharaad. I think there is anxiety about whether or not they have not just finished the curriculum, but the quality of how they finished it. So some of our students would have finished the curriculum supposedly in May or June, but then if you ask them about the level of comprehension or real understanding of what they have been learning, now that's the one that's the most important question that's up in the air. And I think this can also be attributed to the fact that for some students from lower income, doing online learning really has been quite an obstacle for them. For some of the students that we work with, they come from families with 4 or 5 siblings, all sharing and tethering from the same internet from their mother's or their father's phone. So I think that on one level, there's definitely an anxiety about the quality of learning they have been receiving, and also the level of how conducive their learning environment around them is. But I think secondly as well, I think there's an anxiety about how SPM is sort of seen like this sort of ultimate examination that you must do really well in, because we see SPM not only as an indicator of learning, but also sort of an assessment to get into higher education, getting a quality scholarship for many of the students who cannot afford to pay for higher education. And I think that has also kind of led to and caused a toll for a lot of students' mental health as well.
So, Ida, if we could put aside the question of higher education, which is your direct work, I wonder about what you understand about the kids that you serve. And, I understand they come from, underserved communities and so on. So whatever kind of deficits they are that have come along the way, do you think that, the cohort now that's doing foundation, that will be perhaps your sort of target group in the future, they are getting adequate foundational education because of the kind of, closures of schools and so on and so forth?
I think it's only to be expected that for every student, lower income or not, to have had their learning impacted over the last year. And I think it's not only about not only are we talking about the ability to get into university, but also even if they were to go to university, could they actually grasp the fundamentals that they need in order to do well, and beyond university as well, whether or not they already have the fundamentals for them to proceed into society. I think, however, particularly to the lower income students that we work with, we feel that the pandemic has sort of exacerbated the gap and the existing gap that already happens between the more privileged peers as well as students from lower income. And I think what we will see here in terms of the learning gaps that students are experiencing, we will start seeing some of the knock-on effects as well the moment they go into university, or to be honest, there are actually a majority of students from the urban poor community as well who are not in school and therefore are not going to pursue higher education. And so we are also going to see quite a significant number of students who will be dropping out, going into employment early on, and therefore significantly affecting their social mobility moving forward.
I mean, okay, right. So we have this pandemic, and you can't change what's happened in the last year, but perhaps there can be a recalibration of this 2021 school year. Ida, what would you recommend? What would be your recommendation to the government on how to deal with the exams specifically? Would you rather they postpone SPM exams, STPM exams, or cancel it altogether? What would you recommend?
I think what's important right now is to consider two things. One is the clarity in how they communicate the SOPs for examinations. And I think on the ground right now, what we're hearing from students as well, that different schools may have their own interpretation of SOPs. And even with SOP, I think there's a very low level of trust that students have currently about whether or not even SOPs are sufficient in school to keep them safe. But number two, I think what's also very important is also to consider having options. I don't think it is a straight case of cancelling or delaying, but I think we can explore an alternative where students are given the options where, for example, if students do feel that they are ready for the SPM to start in March, they should be given the options to continue and pursue SPM. However, students should also be given alternative dates as well for students to do a repeat or an ulangan in, let's say, June, or even also to consider giving options for students to do it much later down the road. Perhaps even next year, or even considering having students repeat the year 2 if that is something that students feel that they should be at. And I think
does our system allow for that kind of flexibility? I like what you're saying, have it tailor-made or custom according to the capability and the readiness of the student. But does our system allow for that flexibility, that custom tailoredness?
I think what the pandemic has shown is that regardless of whether or not this has been done before, this has to be at least considered as a viable option moving forward. I think we have made some flexibility. For example, if you look at the matriculation program, where I think with the matriculation program previously, they actually ran 2 tracks, where a matriculation program can go on for 1 year, or for students who may not have hit the required criteria, could also go down a 2-year route. So I think there is some flexibility that the government has considered before as with students. We have also had remedial classes for students before they can go into Form 1. I think it's very well within our reach to also consider having some flexibility at least for the next year, at the very least for the students from the SPM 2020 batch.
Okay, thank you so much, Ida, for joining us on the show. We really do appreciate you sharing a Friday night with us and sharing those insights. Thank you. We're going to take a quick break, but after this, more on this topic, so don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Sharaad?
Yeah.
Are you replying?
Coronavirus yang seolah-olah masih tiada vaksin.
Elakkan pergi ke epicenter
kalau boleh lah.
Kes-kes ni dapat dikesan dan dikuarantin di hospital ataupun di rumah.
Terdapat 86 rakyat Malaysia di Wuhan.
Sosioekonomi Bumiputera ini tidak boleh dipisahkan, tidak boleh dikurangkan ataupun ditinggalkan.
Pasal apa syarikat tu rugi? Kira sukses. Sukses is not necessary pada saya lah. Kalau kita nak menolong sesuatu.
Isra, apa benda Rancak TV ni?
Rancak TV ni adalah sebuah channel digital yang bernaung di bawah Astro AWANI.
Apa yang best sangat dengan rancak TV ni?
Of course best. Sebab dia ada macam-macam cerita. Dia ada cerita pasal isu-isu semasa, cerita pasal kesenian, cerita pasal hiburan, cerita pasal kecerdasan, cerita pasal sukan, cerita pasal travel, cerita pasal sejarah, fakta.
Hello, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. Now, this week saw the start of the 2021 school year. Now, some students have returned to the classroom while others continue with home-based learning. Now, have we adequately addressed the material conditions for most children struggling with home-based learning? Joining us on the line now, we have Seng. He's the CEO of Teach for Malaysia, which is an NGO focused on education inequity. Good evening, Seng. Now, this year there's been a lot of focus on the additional challenges faced by students taking exams this year, and rightly so. They've been under immense stress, but we would also like to look at the impact the past year has had on younger students. So, from your observations, how have you noted the lower primary students coping with home-based learning? I mean, has it been easier for younger children in school or in the schooling system, given that they are perhaps, digital and device natives?
Hi, Melissa and Sharaad. It's good to be here with you. I think before I dive into that, I think maybe I'll just sort of zoom out a little bit. And I think that the main challenge that persists around PDPR, home-based learning, is really about catering to the range of needs that different students have. And so one teacher will have hundreds of students, and those students will have very, very different needs, from high-tech connectivity abilities to zero-tech. And at the end of the day, schools and teachers need to be able to cater to all of those needs if we want to ensure that all students are learning, which can be very, very challenging to do. And I think ultimately there are three things that need to be in place that are all dependent on one another. Number one, we really, really need to support our teachers and schools with the training, the systems and the resources for them to be able to do this well. The second thing is that we really need to ensure that principals and teachers are empowered to make decisions that cater to those various needs and be allowed to have a breadth to experiment with solutions as long as health and safety isn't compromised. And the third thing is that partnership with parents and communities is absolutely crucial to make home-based learning work. But that's not going to happen. Partnership isn't going to work without empowerment on school leaders and teachers, the teachers front. So with regards to standard, lower primary school and maybe standard in particular, so the Ministry of Education has prepared and launched a transition module that takes into account the fact that many students may not be prepared for Standard 1, and their pre-schooling may have been disrupted. And so this module takes into account their social emotional learning, which is a great thing because that has been a theme and that has come into focus as a result of the pandemic. So there's a big focus on their social emotional literacy, their ability to read, and their ability to their numeracy. And so this module has been released, and it's been made available to all teachers and schools, of course, and to parents as well. And many teachers have started online classes. I follow Chigu Nazira on Twitter, and she posts about the online classes that she has done with her primary 1 students. But the reality is that for some students, they're not receiving direct support from teachers. So I've heard from a parent that what they were given was they were given the module, which is 102 pages long, and they were told to just support their students and, in essence, figure it out. And this module, it's a very comprehensive module, which has all the content necessary, and it's good content, but the challenge is the module is not designed as a self-learning module for students. So parents essentially have to play a full-time role in supporting their students if they're not receiving online classes from their teachers. And so that's a huge challenge. When it comes to sort of the challenge just around how students experience home-based learning, you can imagine for some students, this is their first time potentially using a device. And so the amount of time that it takes for a parent to support their kids in their learning at home, if they're working at home, it's extremely exhausting for parents. But for students, they're navigating that as well. And so there's many technical glitches, and they're figuring that out. And for some primary schools, for some primary one students, there will be a lot of them that don't know how to read yet as well. And so sort of navigating all of that is additional challenges for the students.
Right. Seng, of course, the one great thing about schools is that they're meant to be levelers. I mean, in terms of material infrastructure, right? Rich or poor, you're supposed to go to the same school and get the same sort of access. In the debate that is not so foregrounded at the moment, which is that have we sacrificed schools and school-based learning because of this terror that seems to have gripped most of us around the question of the coronavirus and infectivity? I mean, do you think that in other countries where they have struggled to, in fact, keep schools open throughout this pandemic, we have maybe yielded too quickly to the idea that we should shut our schools down and move online?
Yeah, sure. I think you're absolutely right in saying that schools are a leveler and that countries have prioritized this, right? So when Japan recently went into their recent version of a lockdown, they decided to keep schools open. And I think a challenge in Malaysia is that the reality is that many students are stressed about going back to school, and many parents and families are stressed as well about their students going back to school because of the health and safety concerns. And I think it's absolutely paramount that at this point in time, with the schools that are open in the measure that they are, that the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, teachers, schools are really, really ensuring that the SOPs are adhered to and very strictly, and ensuring that that is enforced. And so I agree in the sense that there are options. The reality is we're not going to be able to bridge the digital divide in the immediate term. And we're not even going to do that within a year. And the reality is that the fastest way to address the gap that's happening at this point in time is to open schools. And schools can be opened in a safe way. And that's really what we need to prioritize in order to be able to have confidence, to have the confidence of society for us to open schools again. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Seng, one of the ways to reopen schools is to put in all the SOPs, but also it requires a lot more from teachers. It requires resources from teachers, perhaps longer working hours, even the rotational model of splitting schools into two groups and having them come on some days and then the other group on the other days means that teachers will be working throughout. That would mean the need for more resources when it comes to teachers. Is that the barrier keeping us from reopening schools?
So I think that the reality is that teacher workload and burden is huge now. Whether that's physical school or whether that is catering to home-based learning needs. And I think that you're absolutely right, Melissa, in that teachers really need to be resourced at this time. So even things like ensuring that teachers have access to all the PPE that they need, ensuring that they have access to the materials and resources that they need, that's something that we really need to ensure happens for teachers. But I think that when it comes to the workload about reopening school, that is a reality. I think there were jokes that were going on last year when schools did begin to reopen, that the teacher's role has transitioned from not just all the 101 things that teachers already do, but they're toilet caretakers, they're canteen caretakers, they're corridor caretakers, because they have to oversee SOPs during this time when they're actually supposed to be planning for their next lesson or marking books, for example. And so that is a reality that we have to face, I think. And so I think that but at this point in time, teachers are extremely stressed out by the home-based learning approach, and actually reopening schools in a safe way. If we're able, I think it is possible for us to resource schools, and the reality is teachers will have to work a little bit. We'll have to work harder to reopen schools, but I think it would be a similar amount of stress. With regards to the amount of stress they increasingly have.
Thank you for joining us on the show tonight. We really do appreciate your time and you sharing the perspectives of teachers. Thank you for your insights. We're going to take a quick break on Consider This. More in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
ataupun di rumah.
Terdapat zon 6 rakyat Malaysia di Wuhan.
Sosioekonomi Bumiputera ini tidak boleh dipisahkan, tidak boleh dikurangkan ataupun ditinggal.
Pasal apa syarikat tu rugi dengan career sukses? The success is not necessary pada saya. Kalau kita nak menolong sesuatu.
Isra, apa benda Rancak TV ni?
Rancak TV ni adalah sebuah channel digital yang bernaung di bawah Astro AWANI.
Apa yang best sangat dengan Rancak TV ni?
Of course best. Sebab dia ada macam-macam cerita. Dia ada cerita pasal isu-isu semasa, cerita pasal kesenian, cerita pasal hiburan, cerita pasal kecerdasan, cerita pasal sukan, cerita pasal travel, cerita pasal sejarah, fakta-fakta menarik. Dan mereka juga ada buat short film dan juga dokumentari. Dan yang paling penting, Rancak TV.
Hi, thanks for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. We're going to continue our conversation. Datin Noor Azimah Abdul Rahim joins us on the line. She's the chairperson of the Parent Action Group for Education Malaysia, better known as PAGE. Good evening, Azimah. Now, a rotation model was proposed to the Ministry of Education when schools reopened in June last year. The idea is to prevent overcrowding in schools, but also to give everyone that opportunity to physically be in school and receive the same kind of education in classrooms. So the idea is to have two groups, say, primary school standards 1, 2, and 3, and then the other 4, 5, and 6. And the groups will come to schools on different days, and that means reduced days in the classrooms, but supplemented with online learning. Now, the idea was to have everyone in schools, but I'm wondering, Azimah, why this proposal wasn't, looked at or implemented, or looked at its implementation feasibly, whether it can be implemented feasibly in Malaysia.
Hi, Melisa and Sharaad.
Hi.
Hello. Hi, Melisa and Sharaad.
Yes.
Actually, in fact, in June 2020 last year, there wasn't just 2 options, there were actually 3 options. But all the schools decided that they would only do option 1 because it was very easy. And they thought that, basically option 1 was status quo, but with physical distancing. And unfortunately, it didn't work because in the end, 1,000 students, more than 1,000 students were infected when school reopened. So I think we should probably look again at option 3, which is a bit more difficult. But once I think we get it planned properly, forget the inconvenience, and then I think that that is probably the only option whereby you can keep students away from each other enough to ensure that there's no occurrence of infection.
Azimah, do you think we don't recognize that there are trade-offs, that, when it comes to the disease, there will only be reasonable safety, that it can never be complete, that there might be, all kinds of reasons why a child might get infected. And so the question is, what level of risk are we taking, when we open schools, and whether we're willing to do that? Because the downside seems to be this huge educational deficit that we're going to be, these individuals and as a society will be carrying for the next generation.
Yes, that's true, Sharaad, unfortunately. Because we should also look at the benefits versus the risks, because at the moment we assume that everybody has a comfortable home, everybody has got, each child has got their own room, they've all got computers or laptops at hand, not having to share devices, that everything is nice and pretty, But it's not. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, you see severe cases of mental health among children, social, development going down the drain. You have even incest within the family. And one way of eliminating or at least minimizing these social issues is to bring kids back into the school, get them around their friends, their peers, and which can be quite therapeutic. So I think definitely parents have to ensure that children are safe at home, so that when they come to school, when they're in school, that SOPs are strictly adhered to, and when they go home from school to the house, that kids are safe all the way. So if parents can ensure this, if parents do their bit and the schools do their bit, I think we should be able to minimize the rate of infectivity.
Azimah, has there been a clear communication coming from the Ministry of Education about the plan for reopening schools, and beyond just the status quo plus SOP? Is there a concrete and comprehensive plan about the foreseeable future? Because we're likely to deal with this, continue living with this for some time. How are kids going to be learning in schools come 2022, 2023? What does that look like?
Well, at the moment, we parents are still not assured as to what is going to happen when schools reopen on the 8th of March, if it opens. And because states have deferred the MCO dates now, so we're not even sure whether we will all open on the same day or not. But I think that we need to see, even taking what's happened this week with SPM, you see the children being excited to come to school on the first day, but you notice that you notice that taking, especially after taking away the trial exams, the numbers going to school have been dwindling. So is it going to continue to dwindle next week until February 22nd? Because I think parents are also saying, is it that important that you go to school? Should you? Maybe it's better to stay at home and we'll just go for the exams, just go in for the exams and out again, and minimize your time in school. So still big question mark. Parents need assurance from the ministry that they have all these plans up their sleeves, so that should an outbreak happen, who's going to do the contact tracing, who needs to be quarantined, if teachers are quarantined, who's going to take over, kids are quarantined, how they're going to... I think today the ministry announced that if the child is quarantined, they'll give the child a set of papers, a different set of papers, to sit at the child's own time. So lots of considerations which need to be done, and parents need to be assured. Whatever is, I think that SPM needs to go on because it's a moving target, it's a slippery slope, and you never know when this is going to end. So it's just
Azimah, I know we are all, and this is a kind of maybe a national pathology, this focus on exams. But what about the quality of education? Is this a chance for us to have that conversation about really what would provide quality education, communicative and analytical skills that children need, much more than the factoids that are filled, that exams are about, it seems? Is that conversation happening?
Yeah, but in exams, that's when all your analytical skills and technical skills and whatever skills is being assessed. So you have to have it, unfortunately. And how we are in Malaysia, you don't have your SPM cert, you can't even be a shop assistant. And even now, even with jobs, the clerical jobs are being applied by the graduates. So everybody needs that SPM. Whatever is that child, the child must not be denied of the SPM certificate because of the pandemic.
Right. Azimah, thank you for your time. We really appreciate you joining us on the show tonight. Thanks for spending a Friday night with us. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.